folks. Welcome in.
All right. We have, all over the place already. Washington, South
Yes,
Carolina, California, Texas, Florida. I love it. Evan and I coming in from Colorado. So we really do have the whole country covered.
we do.
All
Now
right.
that Ohio's in the chat, we definitely do. We were missing the Midwest, but we're good now.
Well, since we have a good number of folks getting here, shall we officially kick it off?
I think so.
All right, so I'm gonna start by just sort of asking you, as someone with school experience, sort of how you, and who works with teachers very closely a lot, how you're seeing AI being used in schools, either by students or by teachers. And I know we did some research and
Yep.
looked some of this info up as well.
Yes, yes. We have a slide all about this, but the broad picture in what I have seen, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm a training and development specialist with Boxlight. And so I work with educators in a whole range of scenarios, whether that's working with them on training on a particular product or more broadly professional development, including understanding how to use AI. What I have seen most often in schools is that the teachers are the ones sort of thinking deeply about how to use AI, and most of the tools out there, when just even do a quick search, you can even ask ChatGPT, what tools are there out there for educators in AI? And it all centers around teacher use. So really useful things, everything from developing lesson plans on a particular topic to eliminating some busy work. There's a whole range of grading and other administrative functions that need to be done as a teacher. AI can streamline a lot of those, and there are products out there that really focus on that in addition to sort of the more generic sort of text-based apps. But we thought we would talk a little bit about today how students are using AI, because as I mentioned, most of the time the conversation centers around how teachers could use it in the classroom. But the conversation that's sort of going unsaid, at least in certain circles, is that the students are already using AI. They are maybe not thinking as deeply as the teachers about how best to use it. We can be generous there and not say flat out that many of them are using it to cheat, but of course that is going on as well. So there is a lot to discuss about beneficial uses of AI, in addition to, of course, the sort of skepticism and hesitation surrounding AI when we see all these negative stories about it. Because as much as I myself have some skeptical feelings about AI, it is here. Students can find it. It's very easy, and it's only going to become more prevalent over the next few years. So,
Yeah, so on that, like if in the audience here, anyone live, if you have big concerns or worries that are weighing on you with relation to AI, feel free to share those because we can address, I'm sure we share many of the same ones, obviously. Evan already talked about that there is this assumption and in some practice truth that students will use AI to cheat. And that is a huge concern amongst educators that I've spoken with. And, even I've had grad students who are like, okay, so where's the line between cheating and not cheating? How far can I use this? Amongst some
mhm.
of my, peers who I've spoken with. So I think it is worth addressing those, but we do want to spend a lot of today talking about, more how we can acknowledge that they're using it and use it to their benefit as well as, ours as educators. So here's some overall stats we kind of found. We were looking at a whole bunch of different surveys when we found this data. Some were by universities like Harvard, others were by organizations that we may or may not have ever heard of. So some of this we're not sure exactly the depth and quality of these surveys, but it painted a pretty clear picture to us.
Yeah, it's hard to know with things like online surveys. If any of you have followed online surveys in other contexts, we've certainly heard enough about those in elections and so forth. The online surveys sometimes can be quite unreliable. So we tried to sort of paint a broad picture here, with the caveat that some of these results may not be 100% accurate, but the trends certainly point in one direction. So, Hannah, if you want to run through a couple of those bullet points, there's some really interesting information that we discovered from some of these sources.
Yeah. So the first one being that even though all of the resources we seem to find, all the webinars, all the conversations are happening about how teachers can use AI, fewer teachers than students admit to having used AI. And for students, we are looking at least half in just about every survey. Some went as high as 86% of students were using AI. And we have a great question in the chat. What grade levels are these surveys from? Most of the ones I was looking at were high school level, just because they could be doing their own sort of
Yep.
surveys as teenagers. I didn't see much in elementary school for what I looked at. Did you, Evan?
No, not as much at all. I would say upper, secondary level and up to college. Many of these, at least the institutions who were releasing the reports, were universities. Harvard, University of Illinois was one that I saw. So many of them are surveying their own students as well. Yep.
And then as far as students who have used AI, it was still a very small percentage who were using it frequently.
Yep.
So plenty of students admitted to using it to cheat, which in an anonymous survey does give you a sense of accuracy. But the most common uses were just collecting information, getting information, like asking questions about life, about topics, about whatever, using it as therapists, or even brainstorming for different things. So I see, Evan here, you want to read out one of our concerns here in the chat?
Absolutely. A great point in the chat. Deb has concerns that school districts are responding slowly to AI and establishing clear guidelines for teachers, and admins and students about how and when to use it, which is absolutely true. I know that some schools and districts nationwide are thinking through this, but like everything, it takes time, and there's often a lag there. We all know students will dive right into whatever is the hot new tool to try, especially if they're seeing, good results from their peers. I wrote this paper with AI and it worked great. So they're going to try it out much quicker than most teachers. Let's face it, the teachers are often overburdened with other things to worry about rather than trying out new tech tools. So it's a very good concern that we need some guidelines to how is an appropriate way to use this and exactly where that line is, just for maximal educational benefit, but also ethical, which is it's a really clear concern. We also have another comment from Manny that came in just a second ago, that they're worried that younger students are using AI to find all of the answers. They're not developing critical thinking skills. And I think that's something we've seen more broadly in the education sphere for years now, is that the critical thinking skills tend to be declining time over time, which is an unfortunate reality. And so some of the things that we're going to show you today do push back against that a bit in using critical thinking skills to interact with AI. But you're absolutely right that the tool does make it very easy to, as you say, find all the answers, whether that is, math problems, which can be trivially easy. If you can type them in, it can solve it. But then even to the point of writing analysis, understanding when authors point in a reading passage and, the metaphors and things, it can pull all of that out for them, which is definitely a concern.
Yeah, and I was actually reassured by these surveys that students were also worried about the disinformation. So, at least for these older students who have developed a little bit of that suspicion, or they have enough background knowledge that they can tell when ChatGPT is doing something wrong. For instance, when I was planning my honeymoon to Australia, I asked it, I want to see birds. Where should I go in the Cairns area? And it's like, go to Daintree Rainforest. Well, you'll see cool birds like the cassowary and the great green or and the green sea turtle. And that one's pretty obvious. A green sea turtle is not a bird. But younger students might not stop. Hopefully, they'd stop and realize that one. So, like, that's a great, blatantly obvious thing. Uh, but I think that's something that we're going to highlight a lot today is how to get
Mhm.
students to not take AI at face value and to ask it questions.
Yeah, it always makes me worried when I see things like that because that one is very obvious. But like, what if it just gave you the name of a bird that lived in Western Australia, for instance?
Yeah.
Like, you might know enough to pick that out, but chances are not everyone does. And so a turtle, very obvious. But what mistakes are we missing? And then, what disinformation are students absorbing in that case that they may not
It's
even realize?
especially when you don't have the background knowledge, because I know I use ChatGPT all the time for areas that I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing, what's going on, and I love it because a lot of like blog posts and websites and how-tos out there assume I have, a foundation of knowledge when sometimes I'm going into areas where I have absolutely no foundation. So I'm like, okay, ChatGPT, explain this to me like I'm 5. Help me out here. Walk me through this really simply. And if it's telling me anything wrong, I don't have the background to say, oh, wait a second. Um, so that is definitely something that younger students can relate to. They're just probably doing it at less technical levels than I am.
Yes, indeed. Well, thankfully, we do have some ways to push back against some of that. So we have some recommendations for AI tools, many of which on this list you may have heard of, and some you may not have. There are obviously the big three that I think just about everyone who's interested in AI has probably heard of at this point. There's ChatGPT, which, of course, coming from OpenAI is kind of the gold standard there in terms of both the technical expertise, but also sort of the market buy-in, and that everybody knows what ChatGPT is at this point. Of course, Microsoft and Google have their own development teams working on very similar things. If you've never seen Gemini and Copilot, despite being bombarded with advertisements and sponsored links from all of them, no matter what search engine you use, basically they are the same concept as ChatGPT. It's a text box where you can type whatever you want it to do in, and it will spit out the answer in text form. Many of them also do image generation in the same way, where you can ask it to create a picture. And some of these specific tools can go further in various other ways of media. There's dedicated video tools, there's dedicated music tools, etc. But one of the ones that I wanted to highlight to sort of build on that point that we are concerned about disinformation and AI sort of hallucinating, as they call it, and then providing you with a very confident sounding answer that's totally wrong. There is one called Perplexity. And if I can take over screen share here, I believe I'll be able to do that. I'm just going to show you really quickly what Perplexity looks like. Again, it is nothing particularly mind-blowing here. I have the app installed on my computer, but it is a website as well. All you have to do is search for Perplexity, and you will see the standard text box where you can ask the AI a question. But the reason that I like to turn to Perplexity is that it focuses on accuracy and crucially, it cites its sources, which, as a researcher myself, is really important to me because like, if the AI is recommending that I go see a green sea turtle, I probably want to know how it came up with that information. Not only am I annoyed that it's giving me incorrect information, but I'm also kind of curious, right? Like, where did that even come from? Well, at least now we can see what it's thinking, and where it's pulling its sources from. So it can actually be a really nice research aid for your students. And it's a great opportunity to build in that media literacy and the importance of reliable and easily discoverable sources. That when somebody tells you something, don't just accept it at face value. Find out where they got that information, what they're using to sort of build that point. So we can just type something pretty simple in here. I was just talking about this the other day, so I'm going to try this. Where and when did Albert Einstein make his most important discoveries? So maybe we're doing a little research about one of the most famous scientists in the world, and discovering a little bit more about his biography here. So, key locations, Bern, where he worked at the patent office. You may have heard that story. And then, of course, he moved to Germany, where he continued a lot of his work. But you can see here, we've got sources for any of these. Obviously, Wikipedia is a big source, but we can pull it from a whole bunch of different articles. And some of these you can see are from popular articles, some of them are from more academic sources. And we can
That's
see
awesome.
in answers to our questions, in 1905, they call it the miracle year. Einstein produced his special theory of relativity, as well as understanding more about the photoelectric effect and Brownian motion. And then the general theory of relativity was more fleshed out in Berlin a few years later. So we can build on this here. Maybe we want to ask a follow-up question, and maybe we want to continue to look up. We have, it looks like 6 key sources here. I've only clicked through a few of them, but you can see, I think I've already looked at 4 and 6, but let's take a look about the special theory of relativity. Well, that's a PBS article, probably fairly accurate, especially because this is actually from 1998, and I don't think a whole lot has changed about Einstein's biography since 1998, so we should be pretty good there. But this would have been probably a pretty long-standing article, which is usually a good sign that the information is okay in there. So that is one of the tools that I like to turn to. Again, pretty similar in broad strokes to some of these other chat tools, but the fact that it always tells you where it's getting the information and then points you to other sources, I think is really valuable. So
I
you
agree
can
that
evaluate as you're working with the students.
this type of environment, I think, is also really good for launching research papers because students may not be super familiar with how to find good sources, and that's, part of computer science standards and things like that. But if you're in just an English class and you want your students to write a paper on someone, I think it's very reasonable that they could use something like this to gain the broad strokes, to find the resources, to go look at the sources. And I think if you're having students using something like Perplexity, that then all they would need to do is, you can add a page to the end of your paper under like biography or like bibliography or sources and just say, hey, I also used Perplexity. It pointed me to these articles. I think if students are using AI when they're writing papers, especially, that it's important to cite it, but it's important to acknowledge to what extent they used AI instead of outlawing it entirely. Make it a tool. I had a English teacher who was catchphrase saying was, work smarter, not harder. And AI is a way to do that. It's helping you find the resources, it's helping you learn, but it is, especially with something like sources here, giving you that launch pad. And you have to acknowledge that students will start doing this, even if they're not yet. That it's only a matter of time before more and more people adopt this. I think of it as like a calculator. It,
Yep.
yeah,
I
I'm
mean,
sure this kind
it's
of,
only going to get more sophisticated and more common over time. At least that's what the AI companies are telling us. When neither of us work in this field, so we'll take their word for it in that case. There is another tool that we found that, frankly, neither of us have a lot of experience with, but I did think that it sounded pretty useful. I'm curious in the chat, has everybody or anybody in the chat heard of Magic School? I'll just do a quick search for this one. But Magic School is sort of AI for teachers, right? This is creating ways to save time. 94% of users say that Magic School saves them time. So it's a really great resource for educators. I'm just trying to find a screenshot of what this tool looks like. Well, it's not the Magic School bus. Let's try that again here. Here, this looks pretty good. So you can see it has these little, instead of the sort of the text-based tool, it has little buttons that you can click on. So let's make a multiple choice assessment. Let's give feedback to student work. It's really a useful tool designed specifically for teachers. And we found this alternative that is sort of the same concept for students. So I don't know if any of you have used this before. I haven't myself, but it looks very interesting. So I'm definitely going to take a closer look at this over time. But student AI seems to be the same concept as Magic School, but from the student perspective. So instead of creating a multiple choice assessment, maybe they would be much more willing, or it would be more important for the students to summarize documents, convert videos to notes, do a mock interview. There were ones that could create cover letters or resumes, things that students are doing frequently that take a lot of time. And so I would certainly not advocate this as a replacement for, watching watching the videos yourself and drawing your own conclusions from them. But this could be a really nice alternative for some of these tasks that students are doing frequently. So that's worth checking out. I don't know if any of you have students that are using this already. This is a paid tool. You can try it for free, but I believe it is a trial. So unlike something like ChatGPT, this is something that I think probably is targeted more at those higher education students, because I don't think many high schoolers are going to just throw money at this tool without, the financial resources that come along with that. But it might be out there that I haven't heard too many people, but it might be gaining in popularity. Just something that we noticed, which was pretty cool. And then the last thing, just as a little plug, Boxlight actually has their own AI lesson generation platform. So if any of you have heard of my class, definitely worth a look, because it can do very similar things in that Magic School vein. You can build lessons or quizzes on any topic, build in activities, or simply photos or introduction slides, etc. Can do a whole bunch of really cool AI things in my class. So if any of you have not heard of my class, might be worth just checking into that. That's joinmyclass.com. Uh, if anyone's interested,
Yeah,
take a look.
it's very powerful, very cool. I did also post a link in the chat for a webinar we hosted a few months ago on how for teachers to use AI for lesson planning and things like that. It goes deeper into Magic School as well as using ChatGPT. So that YouTube link is there. If you're watching this recording after the fact, it will be down in the description as well.
Excellent. So Hannah, I know you've tried a few little sort of ways to use AI yourself, sort of playing the role of a student and thinking through some of this. I know that you've created some resources that you might share. So I'm curious what ChatGPT was able to build for you.
Yeah, so I wanted to share, especially we are mid-May. So first of all, thank you to everyone who is here live. I know it is stressful season, but with finals coming up for a lot of students, I think one of the best ways to use AI in as a student in education is with helping them study. So coming up with tools and resources for studying for their final tests and things like that. And so let me share my screen again. I made up a list of a few different ideas I had come up with in advance. So just asking it for a study guide. Be like, hey, I need a study guide on the Civil War. Uh, or I need a study guide on, you know, parts of the body, or how cell processes work, whatever it is. You can ask it for review questions. Say, hey, ChatGPT, can you quiz me on this? And it can be like in the immediate, like flashcard type things. And I say ChatGPT because it is the Kleenex of AI, and it's the one I've used the most, but it doesn't have to be that platform. It can be any of them. I know even things like Gemini have student designed interfaces that are, going to be a little bit more censored than, other AI platforms that are designed for any age. But so I did ask ChatGPT for this next one, which was write a song for a specific topic. So I went into my ChatGPT and I said, hey, will you write me a song to help me learn about the organs of the body? I'm in fourth grade. Some sort of a prompt like that, that your students may be able to ask the questions themselves. So showing them that this is a good way to use AI is worthwhile. So here is the song it wrote for me. And it even gave me the tune is to Twinkle Twinkle. So my apologies for my terrible singing, but you are about to get some. Heart is pumping every day, sending blood on its way. Lungs help us breathe in air. Oxygen is everywhere. Brain is bossy in my head, thinking thoughts and dreams in bed, and so forth. But that one made me laugh because their brain is bossy. And so keep reading down
Fun.
because there is also something a little suspicious or a little weird with where this song goes and with the image Evan had his ChatGPT generate to go with it. So, anyone noticing anything weird here?
Yep. We'll see who finds it in the chat. Even if you have a pretty basic knowledge of the human body, I think you'll be able to find this one.
Yep. All right. Abby responded that images with bones aren't all bones. That
Yep.
sure is not a bone right there. Um, Another one we've got in the chat here, somebody saying lungs? Question mark? I mean, that could be that child's name, but I don't think that's what ChatGPT was going for.
It would be an interesting name. Yeah, Gene's got it in the chat. The one that stood out to us as the most egregious, sending or the kidneys sending waste down to your feet. I don't think that's how kidneys function. Last time I checked, that wasn't what feet do. So, you know, even though ChatGPT did a pretty good job here, it's not really foolproof. And so Hannah pushed back a little bit. Do kidneys send waste to your feet? Great catch,
I
says
didn't tell it it
ChatGPT.
was wrong. I just
Yeah,
asked. Like,
yeah,
because if you tell an AI that it is wrong, it will believe you.
yes. AI is very I
Accommodating?
don't, yeah, accommodating is a good word. It loves to agree with you, which could be very dangerous. So another thing to highlight for those students that if you give it a perspective or strongly advocate for certain views, it will take your perspective and run with it, which can be a little bit dangerous sometimes if you're coming in with disinformation. Um, but yeah, it did correct it. It gave you the correct information afterwards, but it would be
And updated
nice.
my verse.
Yep, it
Now
did
kidneys
update
clean
your
my
verse.
blood so neat, send the waste where I go pee.
Still works.
It works well enough.
Yes.
Um, but yes, I have according to my husband now, apparently outdated reference. Here I was trying to be all hip and new. But an Among Us reference of students should
Yep.
have a suspicious mentality when it comes to AI. So, that's sus. I don't think kidneys send waste to your feet. If they do, what does it do there? Like, is it just stuck there? Are your feet just, terrifying pools of waste? I don't think so. So
Yeah, unfortunately, I
just
think
ask
Among
those
Us
questions.
is a couple years old at this point, and students have moved on. My neighbor's kids definitely did go through that phase of calling things sus and talking about Among Us, but they haven't for a while. I'm sorry.
I know. Manny's wondering if he can get these slides to show their examples. Sure, yeah. I will put my email down here in the chat. You can also uh, generate your own. It is not hard to generate things that are incorrect. I wasn't trying for it. It just happened.
Yep.
So
Now
yeah, this
feel
is
free
literally
to
my
to
first
reuse
attempt at creating
these.
a song.
Yeah, feel free to reuse these. That is totally fine with us. But like Hannah says, you can probably find this with something, immediately relevant to whatever content you're talking about with your students. It's probably going to do something like this at some point.
Yeah. All right, so back to the list of some other studying tips. Creating analogies specific to the student's interest. So you can use this as a teacher or the students can use this for themselves. Let's say you've got a kid who's super into basketball and you're trying to explain, I don't know, a battle. And you can say, hey, can you help me make sense of, I don't know, the battle for Britain in terms of a basketball game? And it can do that. And it can do that way better than I could because I don't know much about either of those things. Um, or it could say, make this thing Minecraft themed, make this thing, whatever your students are into right now. ChatGPT is actually surprisingly good at analogies, and AI is pretty good at relating things in different ways. I often will ask it for help simplifying what I want to say. It's like, okay, I've written this thing. Can you help me grade it down to like a second grader level if I'm doing activities for young students? Because I know I have a tendency when I write and when I talk to sometimes be a bit above grade for whatever age level I'm writing a lesson plan for. So I've used it that way, but it's good for analogies too. It loves them even when I don't ask for them. And then a practical thing for anyone, creating schedules. Like for people who have a hard time staying on task, breaking things down into steps, especially for, you know, students who have a hard time focusing, you can ask AI interfaces to help you create study schedules. And then the
Absolutely.
last one here is actually one we got out of a AI podcast hosted by some of our Box Lead colleagues. Evan put the link to that one in the chat as well. But this was an idea they talked about, which I absolutely loved, which was having a conversation with a historical or literary figure. So I think like that's a really cool way to learn about history or different things in a way that feels a little more real, that feels more authentic. It's not just dates and, you know,
It's a really nice way to make things come alive a bit more for your students. History class always has that reputation of being a little bit dry, a little bit less relevant to their current lives.
and it
Of course,
shouldn't be.
that's not
History's
true at all.
fascinating.
That's a big misconception about history that people often start with, unfortunately, and that really brings things to the forefront. I mean, they can ask any question they want and they can get information. Of course, we still do need to be on the lookout for mistakes, but for the most part, it does a really good job trying this. So I did prepare a quick little demo here. So if I go ahead and share my screen, I'm curious if anybody has heard of this person. I'm not going to tell you who it is until I type it here real quick. But let's get rid of Perplexity here, and we're going to turn to ChatGPT. Again, you could probably do the same thing in Perplexity, but we're trying to show a couple different tools here. And I'm going to just ask ChatGPT here, pretend to be Mary Anning. And we're going to have you answer some questions from a fifth grade class about your life.
Please answer as if you are talking to students. All right.
Yep.
I'm excited. I don't know much about Mary Anning, so
All right. So Mary Anning, it's giving you actually a whole bunch of these actually. And we can start asking our own after it completes a few of these. But Mary Anning, it is correct here, lived a long time ago in the early 1800s in a seaside town. And that was just the start of the importance of Mary Anning. So why are you remembered today? Let's try to just get the uh, the most important things about Mary Anning here. So Mary Anning, if you don't know, was actually one of the very first researchers to discover paleontology. Started finding fossils like ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, etc. You know, we can even ask, how did you find these fossils? So Mary Anning would just explore near her home. Being a woman in Victorian England, one of the things that she could do was go on walks along the seashore. There was a lot of things that women were not permitted to do way back then, but that was one of them that they could do. And she started taking a deep curiosity in the rocks and cliffs around her seaside town, and started uncovering all of these, some of the very first fossils discovering. And let's see if we can take this a little further. So her research actually started pushing back against most people's conception of the Earth. And actually, the concept of extinction was just becoming something that everyone took for granted. Nowadays we hear all about animals going extinct on a regular basis, but back in the 1800s, most people thought that that was actually impossible and that animals could never appear or disappear. And so finding these very strange fossils that didn't look like anything currently on Earth was a very big deal. And a lot of large names in the scientific field did not take her seriously at first. But eventually that did end up changing. That Mary Anning now is remembered as a really key figure in the dawn of paleontology and just understanding the natural processes of extinction. So if anybody is curious more about Mary Anning, she has a whole bunch of resources out on the internet all about her. You can continue to use ChatGPT or other things to investigate her further, but there is a lot of information. That's a pretty fun story. Um, Let
Yeah,
me.
I enjoy the tone of voice I'm seeing here because I ran this test with FDR and he sounded very different in ChatGPT's impersonation of him. So I think it's nice to be able to, it feels more real. It makes the humans not just a name on a page, even if it's not, we don't know exactly how all these people sounded. If there's published writings from them, we can get, like, it's using some of that probably, but, you know, or I know with FDR, it was pulling from some of his speeches that he gave. So I think it helps. It helped me certainly to be able to see and understand. And you can ask, like, hey, so who are your main opponents? Now let me talk to them. And I think one thing Evan did at the beginning, which I did differently when he said, answer some questions about yourself, it provided the questions. When I asked, it said, I'm like, I want to have a conversation with FDR. Can you please respond as if you are him? And I didn't say anything else. I also didn't tell him what age I was. So that would be, that's again the I'm in third grade, I'm in fourth grade. That'll help it not prompt its own questions, at least based on my experience versus Evan's just now.
Yep.
Oh,
This
yeah,
can
that's
definitely
awesome.
go in all sorts of different ways depending on how you start those initial prompts. And as you use sort of these text-based tools a little bit more, you'll start to feel a little bit more comfortable with that. There are all sorts of strategies for how you would craft a question like this. And for example, if you're doing this particular type of activity with a figure that has some historical controversy, all the controversies about Mary Anning are pretty much done. I think extinction is an acknowledged reality these days, as is the existence of fossils. So that one, not too much to worry about, but there's any number of historical and more current figures where you would want to tread carefully in that vein. And so um, perhaps asking it to take a certain perspective, to be aware of who it's talking to, it can be very important when you're doing this kind of work. So there are a lot of resources that you can find from people more experienced than us about doing activities like this. Plenty of blog posts and articles out there. If you just look up, how to interview a historical figure with AI, you'll find lots of great resources. But that's one of my favorite little ways to interact with tools like this is to bring these figures to life a little bit more than you ordinarily would be able to. So another fun idea.
I agree. Now, one other idea I wanted to share with y'all related to research was sometimes when you're working with younger students, you can find these really good articles online, and they may not be written at an appropriate grade level for your students. So the other day, I was working on a lesson plan for elementary students, and it was a design challenge where they would use their 3D printer and create a relief sculpture of a artifact or it's not an artifact, of a two-dimensional painting. So they would create a relief sculpture to recreate something like Monet's Water Lilies or Van Gogh's Starry Night as a relief sculpture for anyone who's visually impaired to be able to feel the art that they can't see. But in order to do this, I had to do this whole background on what relief sculpture is. And for anyone who doesn't know, it's kind of like a penny or Mount Rushmore as two very different examples of low relief versus high relief. But essentially, it's a sculpture where you're still attached to the main surface. And so to help students learn about relief, I provided some slides, but I also provided this New World Encyclopedia article. And if I sit here and read the first paragraph, a relief is sculpted work in which figures are either carved into a level plane or more typically the plane is removed to create images sculpted on its surface without completely disconnecting them from the plane, etc. This gets a little complicated for elementary students. I'm not expecting them to be able to process this. So in the lesson plan, I actually wrote it out that you read that first paragraph aloud, you ask students if they understand it. They're probably going to say not really, especially if you read as fast as I did. And then take them into an AI platform, have them copy and paste the article in and say, please summarize this for me for grade level, blank grade level. So you can have AI take links, take references of valid sources and summarize it in a pretty safe way, because at that point, you know it's getting its data from that specific page. So we showed students how to do that as part of this lesson. And then the last lesson idea I want to share with you all before we leave you today is a fun idea I came up with when planning this called remodeling history. So we did another webinar a little while back about using AI to create 3D models. And after I finish explaining this, I can drop it in the chat or Evan can grab the YouTube link. But I had AI and I asked it to generate or create a model of a Viking longship. That was my prompt to it. And it gave me these 4 models here for comparison. This is what an actual Viking ship looks like, grabbed from this website here. And so I'm looking at these and it's like, why are the sails sideways? Or 3 sails? Or, okay, that one doesn't look terrible up front. Let's keep going. This one doesn't look too bad from this angle, but as I spun around it, it's built like a weird sleigh in the back where it has 2 back pieces instead of 1.
I'm very curious what the bottom of that ship looks like, but we might not like it. Might not be
Not to
very
mention these
useful.
oars look absolutely useless.
Yeah.
So the lesson idea being here is you could use something like an 3D model generator. This is done through Meshy, which again, that link is now in the chat. And so students can come in here, they can find the most optimal design and then take that design, bring it into Tinkercad or whatever your 3D modeling software you prefer is, and make updates to it, fix it so that it is more historically accurate. So I thought this was a fun one because you got some really weird designs where it's like, yeah, if you're looking at a painting, it might think that that's what a Viking longship looks like because it doesn't understand the perspective, but then comparing with actual history, like it gets students researching just to figure out which of the 4 designs it gave is the best. And you can do the same type of thing with like 2D image generators as well to see if they can spot inaccuracies with the AI images. You know, we've seemed to have moved past this, but I know when AI image generation was brand new, it had an obsession with fingers. And there would be like 8 fingers on everything. But there are still lots of ways that image generation and 3D image generation is incorrect. So, you know, this is a fun to sort of tie in the 3D printer, tie in the 3D modeling, and challenge students to actually figure out what was historical, what was authentic, and then you can print it out and have a very cool 3D print that ties in with why you don't always trust AI.
Yeah, and it builds on that idea of personalizing the learning a little bit. The students are able to build their own Viking longship. Everybody's going to be a little bit different. Maybe they want to include things like a design on the sail or something. And you know, I've done a fair amount of 3D modeling, but I would struggle to create a Viking longship from scratch. That's not my field. I don't build 3D models like that frequently. And so having the ability to pull in a base from AI that then I can make adjustments to, obviously we would want to change a few things about this model, but that's a lot simpler than starting from nothing. And then you can, as Hannah said, print that really fun model, and the students will have something to remember this lesson with. The same would go for image generation. If you're not an amazing artist, but perhaps you can make some tweaks. That's a really great use of it. I'm
I would say this
noticing,
could even be a great beginning of the year thing where they pick something of history they're interested in. They pick, you give them a couple different topics that they're going to cover in the year and let them choose what they're going to create. The
yep,
self-driven side of it, I think is really powerful for students owning history and owning how to use AI and owning how to proceed with suspicion and do their own research and things like that. So that's one of the things I really like about this as an idea, or any of the ones where you're
yeah.
intentionally seeking out incorrectness.
Yep. One thing that I remember from my own education was reading the Iliad. There's a passage where they describe Achilles' shield in a great detail. And my teacher had us draw from the description what we thought the Achilles' shield looked like. And I was never a great artist. I wasn't particularly strong at drawing freehand. And there were so many intricate details and personalities and characters that I kind of knew what they were supposed to look like, but I really struggled to recreate that. And I remember this lesson to this day because I was frustrated by it. But this is an example where I could have done this no problem with using something like ChatGPT to make that shield come alive for me. Because, I wasn't asking it from nothing. In this case, I had the text description. I was just struggling to put that pen down and actually draw, which, maybe that frustration could be alleviated in this case. I'm seeing a lot of themes coming through these various examples that we're giving you, but one thing that really stands out to me is that we're turning this around and not asking ChatGPT for the answers. In many cases, we're asking ChatGPT for the questions or maybe just the starting point of our discussion, whether this is going to build into a research paper later, whether we are creating a study guide where we actually want it to quiz us rather than us asking for the answers. It really changes the perspective on these tools and brings them to a more useful place because we all, I think, in this call share the same thoughts about how unfortunate it is that students are just able to pull up the answers without really thinking about anything if they have access to these tools. So this gives them a way to use them more productively and allows you to have that conversation, like we were discussing earlier, with the pitfalls of AI because it is not perfect. And in many cases, they are simply going to regurgitate wrong information, which I don't think anybody wants to do, even if it's just to make sure they don't get marked down on their scores. So hopefully that was helpful in terms of coming up with a few examples and ways to use these more productively.
Yep.
And
So thanks
thanks.
everyone for joining. This was again brought to you by the Mimeo STEM, part of Boxlight. Evan and my emails are there on the screen. I've also dropped them back in the chat. So if you have any questions, Manny mentioned wanting to get some of these slides, so feel free to email us and we can respond to that. But yeah, we have a whole suite of education products. We want to be here to support teachers. We want to support these, and we will be back doing more of these video podcasts in the fall. We're going to take a summer break. But it will be the four of us here who you've seen on these learning labs before. So keep an eye out for those probably in September, just because August is so busy with back to school, especially our professional development team. Evan and I are often out training in August. So
Yep.
look for those. We will, if any of you here are our like business partners, our reseller partners. We will be doing some webinars for you, but giving the teachers some time off for the summer as well. So we look forward to seeing everyone then.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. Have a good summer, and we will see you back in the fall for more of these conversations. Appreciate all of you participating in the chat and having a good conversation today. Bye, everyone.